The horse was bolting toward the river, eyes wild with terror, and everyone stepped back. Everyone except her. Pollyanna Hartwell didn't think about propriety, or her widow's weeds, or the whispers that would follow. She simply moved, her voice low and steady, her hands fearless. The stallion belonged to Damon Ashford, the untouchable squire of Meadowbrook, a man who'd sworn off marriage, who trusted no one. But when he saw her calm his panicked horse with nothing but courage and gentleness, something shifted in his carefully guarded heart. He didn't know yet that hiring her would unravel everything he believed about love, partnership, and the cage he'd built around his own desires. The September morning broke cold over the Yorkshire hills, bringing with it the kind of frost that turned the grass silver and made breath visible in the still air. Mrs. Pollyanna Hartwell stood at the window of Hartwell Cottage, watching the mist rise from the valley below, her fingers pressed against the glass until the cold seeped through her skin. 22 years old, and already she felt ancient, already a widow, already alone. The cottage was silent except for the ticking of the mantel clock, each second marking time she could not afford to waste. On the small desk behind her lay a ledger, its pages covered in her careful hand, numbers that refused to add up favorably no matter how many times she reworked them. The debts her late husband had left were like stones around her neck, pulling her down toward a future she could not bear to contemplate. It was 1886 that year when autumn seemed to arrive early across England, as if nature itself sensed the changes coming. In the village below, smoke was beginning to rise from chimneys as households stirred to life. Soon the bells of St. Bridget's would ring, calling the faithful to morning service. Pollyanna had stopped attending regularly 6 months ago, unable to bear the pitying glances of women who whispered that a widow so young should accept protection before circumstances forced her hand. She turned from the window and surveyed her small domain. Hartwell Cottage had been part of her marriage settlement, the one thing that could not be claimed by creditors. It was modest, 4 rooms total, with a small stable behind that currently housed only chickens and the old mare, Juniper, who had been too aged to be worth seizing. The furniture was simple but well maintained, the floors scrubbed, the curtains mended where they had frayed. Pollyanna kept her home with the same meticulous care she applied to her account books, as if by maintaining perfect order. In these small things, she could prevent the larger chaos from overwhelming her entirely. Today was market day, and she had work. Mrs. Henderson at the milliner's shop had accounts that needed sorting, and the vicar's wife had mentioned that the parish books were in disarray. Pollyanna had discovered a talent for numbers in the year since Thomas's death, or perhaps she had always possessed it, and marriage had simply never given her reason to use it. Either way, her ability to organize accounts and manage simple administrative tasks had become her lifeline, providing just enough income to keep body and soul together while she determined what came next. She dressed carefully in her second-best black wool dress, the one without patches visible unless one looked closely. Her widow's weeds had become something between armor and prison. They kept men at a respectful distance, but they also marked her as someone to be pitied, someone whose usefulness had ended with her husband's last breath. She pinned her dark blonde hair into a severe bun, not allowing herself the vanity of the softer styles she had once favored. Vanity was for women who had futures. She was simply trying to survive each day. The walk to the village took 30 minutes along the narrow road that wound between stone walls and hedgerows, heavy with blackberries. Pollyanna walked quickly, her practical boots making little sound on the packed earth. The countryside was beautiful in that particular English way that made her chest ache. Rolling green hills studded with sheep, ancient oaks spreading their branches like benedictions, the distant moors rising purple and mysterious against the horizon. This land had been in Thomas's family for generations, passed down through eldest sons until it reached him, the last of his line, childless, leaving behind only debts and a young widow who had never quite belonged. She was nearly to the village when she heard the commotion ahead, shouts of alarm, the thunder of hooves, a horse's terrified scream that sent ice down her spine. Pollyanna rounded the bend and saw chaos unfolding at the junction, where the road from Meadowbrook Estate met the market road. A magnificent bay stallion, easily 16 hands high, was rearing and plunging in the middle of the road, eyes rolling white with terror. The expensive saddle on its back was empty, the reins trailing dangerously near its hooves. A small crowd had gathered at a safe distance, farmers on their way to market, a few villagers all shouting advice that only seemed to panic the animal further. The horse was heading toward the river, where the road narrowed dangerously and the bank dropped away steep and treacherous. Pollyanna did not think. Thinking would have reminded her that she was a gentlewoman, that her role was to step aside and let men handle such matters, that she wore mourning clothes and was supposed to conduct herself with appropriate solemnity and restraint. Instead, she moved on pure instinct, born of years spent around her late husband's workhorses and her own deep love of the creatures. She walked forward steadily, her hands open at her sides, her voice low and calm. "Easy now," she murmured, not loudly but with absolute certainty. "Easy, beautiful one. No one here will hurt you. Easy now." The stallion's ears swiveled toward her, though his hooves still danced nervously on the cobblestones. Behind her, she heard a man shout, "Mrs. Hartwell, step back," but she ignored him. She could see the foam on the horse's neck, the cuts on his flanks where something had spooked him badly. His nostrils flared as he caught her scent, trying to determine if she was friend or foe. "That's right, see me," Pollyanna continued in that same low, steady voice. "I'm no threat to you. Whatever frightened you is gone now. You're safe." She was close enough now to smell his sweat, to see the intelligence in those wild eyes. Slowly, so slowly, she extended one hand, palm up. The stallion's head lowered slightly, nostrils working to catch her scent. She waited, every muscle relaxed, breathing deeply and evenly. She had learned long ago that horses could sense fear, could feel the tension in a human body. She gave him only calm, only certainty, only the quiet confidence of someone who understood his fear and did not judge him for it. The moment stretched long and fragile. Then, with a snort that seemed almost relieved, the stallion lowered his head completely and pushed his velvet nose into her palm. Pollyanna's other hand came up slowly to stroke his neck, murmuring nonsense words of comfort while her fingers found and gathered the trailing reins. "There now," she said softly. "There's my brave boy. What frightened you so badly, What sent you running?" She was so focused on the horse that she did not hear the rider approaching until a deep voice spoke directly behind her. "Madam, I must thank you for saving my very expensive and apparently very foolish horse." Pollyanna turned, still keeping one hand on the now calm stallion's neck, and found herself looking up at a man on a glossy black mare. He was perhaps 26, with dark hair curling slightly beneath his riding hat, and eyes that even at this distance she could see were an unusual shade of grey-green. He sat his horse with the unconscious grace of someone born to the saddle, and his riding clothes, though not ostentatiously fashionable, were clearly tailored by someone who understood both quality and the athletic requirements of country life. But it was his face that caught her attention. Not classically handsome, perhaps, but arresting. Strong features that suggested both determination and intelligence, a mouth that looked accustomed to smiling, though it was currently pressed into a line of concern. And in those remarkable eyes, she saw something she had not expected. Genuine relief and a flash of something that might have been admiration. "Your horse is not foolish, sir," Pollyanna said, finding her voice though her heart was suddenly beating rather faster than the exertion warranted. "He was terrified. Look here, these cuts on his flanks. Something struck him, and recently." The man swung down from his mare with fluid ease and approached, his attention shifting to examine the horse. As he drew close enough for proper inspection, Pollyanna became acutely aware of his height. He was tall enough that she had to tilt her head to meet his eyes, and the breadth of his shoulders beneath the well-cut riding coat. There was a scent of leather and autumn air, and something else, something that made her pulse flutter in a way she had thought died with her marriage. "Good God," he muttered, running expert hands over the stallion's flanks. "You're right. These are deliberate strikes. Someone used a crop on him, and viciously." His jaw tightened, and Pollyanna saw something flash in his eyes that was not quite anger, but something colder and more controlled. "Did you see who did this?" "I only just arrived," Pollyanna said. "I heard the commotion and came to help." "Then you are either very brave or very foolish yourself, Mrs." He left the question hanging, those grey-green eyes now fixed on her with an attention that made her skin warm despite the autumn chill. "Hartwell," she supplied, belatedly remembering propriety and dropping into a brief curtsy, though it felt absurd given that she was still holding his horse's reins. "Mrs. Pollyanna Hartwell." Something shifted in his expression. Recognition, perhaps, or reassessment. The name Hartwell would be known in the area, associated with the small cottage and the farmer who had died leaving debts. She saw him taking in her mourning dress, the quality of the fabric despite its obvious age, the capable hands that still gentled his horse with unconscious skill. "Damon Ashford," he said, and now it was Pollyanna's turn to reassess. Ashford of Meadowbrook Estate. She knew the name, of course. Everyone in the district knew Meadowbrook, the vast property that had passed to the second son only 2 years ago when his elder brother had died in a hunting accident. The same Ashford, who was said to be a charming rogue with women and an iron-fisted landlord with his tenants, the same Ashford about whom the village girls sighed and the local mothers schemed, trying to position their daughters in his path. Looking at him now, Pollyanna could understand the sighing at least. There was something undeniably compelling about him, a vitality that seemed barely contained within the bounds of polite society, a suggestion of wildness beneath the gentleman's polish. "Mrs. Hartwell," he said, and there was something in the way he spoke her name that made it sound like a question and an answer all at once. "I find myself in your debt. If you had not intervened, Midnight here might have broken his neck in the river, or worse, trampled someone in the crowd." "I did only what anyone would have done," Pollyanna said, though they both knew this was not true. The other bystanders had kept their safe distance, content to shout advice from the sidelines. "Nevertheless, I am grateful." He paused and she saw him considering something, weighing options with the quick calculation of a man accustomed to making decisions. "You have a natural hand with horses. I don't suppose—" He stopped himself, seemed to reconsider, then continued with careful formality. "Forgive me, but I could not help noticing your skill. Where did you learn to handle them so well?" It was a personal question, perhaps too personal for a first meeting, but Pollyanna found herself answering honestly. "My late husband kept work horses, and before that, my father had a small stable. I have always found horses easier to understand than people, if I am being truthful." A smile flickered across Ashford's face, transforming it entirely. "Then you are wiser than most, Mrs. Hartwell. Horses at least do not lie about their intentions." Before Pollyanna could respond, a commotion from the crowd reminded them both that they were not alone. An older farmer was pushing forward, red-faced and agitated. "Begging your pardon, Mr. Ashford, sir, but it ain't proper. A lady handling livestock in the road like some common—" "That lady," Ashford interrupted, his voice cutting and cold in a way that made the farmer's words die mid-sentence, "has just prevented an accident that might have cost lives, including potentially your own, Mr. Grimshaw. I suggest you offer thanks rather than criticism." The farmer's mouth worked soundlessly for a moment before he managed a grudging, "Yes, sir, of course, sir. Meant no offense to the lady." Pollyanna felt heat rise in her cheeks, though whether from embarrassment or anger she could not quite say. She was accustomed to such comments, to the constant policing of her behavior by those who believed they knew better how a widow should comport herself. But she was not accustomed to being defended, and certainly not by a man of Ashford's standing. "If you'll excuse me," she said, preparing to release the stallion's reins and continue to the village. "I have business in town." "Wait," Ashford said, then seemed to catch himself. "That is, might I offer you a ride? Midnight needs to walk slowly back to Meadowbrook to calm his nerves, and it would be my honor to escort you to wherever you're headed. It is the least I can do." Pollyanna hesitated. Every rule of propriety she had ever learned screamed that she should refuse. She barely knew this man, had no chaperone, and was already the subject of too much village gossip. To be seen riding beside Damon Ashford would set every tongue wagging from here to the next county. And yet there was something in his eyes, in the straightforward way he waited for her answer, that suggested his offer was made in genuine gratitude rather than calculated seduction. And more than that, there was something in her own chest, some small rebellious spark she had thought extinguished, that wanted to say yes. wanted to reclaim, just for a moment, the feeling of being something more than a vessel for other people's pity. "I am going to the village," she said finally, "to Mrs. Henderson's millinery shop. It is not far." "Then it is on my way," Ashford said smoothly, though Pollyanna suspected this was not strictly true. "Come. Midnight will behave himself now, I think, and my mare is gentle enough for a novice, though I suspect you need no such reassurance." He was right. When he helped her onto the black mare, his hands at her waist sending an entirely inappropriate jolt of awareness through her, Pollyanna settled into the side saddle as if born to it. The mare responded immediately to her gentle guidance, falling into step beside the stallion as Ashford led them both away from the dispersing crowd. They rode in silence for a few minutes, the only sounds the steady clop of hooves and the morning birds beginning their songs. Pollyanna was acutely aware of Ashford beside her, of the way he moved with his horse as if they were one creature, of the strength in the hands that guided Midnight with such care despite the animal's recent panic. "You said your husband kept workhorses," Ashford said eventually, his tone carefully neutral. "Hartwell. I confess I do not recall the name in connection with any of the local estates." "You would not," Pollyanna said, deciding that honesty was simpler than deflection. "My late husband was a farmer, Mr. Ashford. A respectable one, but a farmer nonetheless. Our property was small, a cottage and a few acres." She waited for the subtle withdrawal, the polite distance that usually followed such an admission. She was gentry by birth, but had married beneath her station for reasons that had seemed compelling at 17 and foolish by 20. Most men of Ashford's class would consider her beneath their notice, or worse, fair game for inappropriate advances, given her reduced circumstances. But Ashford merely nodded thoughtfully. Then he was a fortunate man to have secured such a wife. The land can be harsh, and those who work it need partners with practical skills as well as gentle graces. It was, Pollyanna thought, one of the kindest things anyone had said to her in longer than she could remember. Not pity, not condescension, but simple acknowledgement of reality, and even, was she imagining it? Respect. "He died a year ago," she heard herself saying, though she had not intended to share so much. A fever that came on quickly and would not break. He was gone within a week. "I am sorry for your loss," Ashford said, and there was something in his voice that suggested he meant it, that he was not merely reciting empty social pleasantries. "It is a difficult thing, to lose someone suddenly. My brother—" He stopped, seemed to collect himself. "Well, I understand something of unexpected endings." They had reached the edge of the village now, where the road widened and the first buildings came into view. Pollyanna knew she should dismount, should walk the rest of the way alone rather than provide more fodder for gossip. But she found herself reluctant to end this strange, unexpected conversation. "The millinery shop is just ahead," she said, gesturing toward the neat building with its painted sign. "Thank you for the escort, Mr. Ashford, and for your earlier defense. It was unnecessary, but appreciated." "It was entirely necessary," Ashford said firmly. He swung down from Midnight and came to help her dismount, his hands again at her waist, steadying her as she slid from the saddle. For a moment they stood close enough that she could see the flecks of green in his grey eyes, could smell the faint scent of sandalwood that clung to his collar. "Mrs. Hartwell," he said, and there was something in his voice that made her breath catch. "I wonder if I might call upon you at Hartwell Cottage, if you are comfortable with such a visit." "I would very much like to discuss—" He paused, seemed to search for words. "That is, I have a proposition that might be of mutual benefit." Every warning bell that Pollyanna possessed began clanging loudly in her mind. Propositions from wealthy gentlemen to impoverished widows rarely ended well for the widows, and yet looking into his eyes, she saw none of the calculating gleam she might have expected. Instead, there was something almost uncertain, as if he himself was not quite sure what he was asking. "What sort of proposition?" she asked bluntly, too tired of games to be anything but direct. Ashford's mouth quirked in a half-smile that suggested he appreciated her forthright approach. "An honest one, I assure you. I have recently taken on the full management of Meadowbrook, and I find myself in need of someone with a particular set of skills. Someone who understands both accounts and animals, who can move between the great house and the tenant farms, without creating friction. Someone, in short, rather like you. "You're offering me employment?" Pollyanna said, not quite able to keep the skepticism from her voice. "I'm offering you a conversation," Ashford corrected gently, "one where we might discuss possibilities without the entire village watching. Would 3 o'clock this afternoon be convenient? I promise to bring a groom as chaperone if that would make you more comfortable." Pollyanna knew she should refuse. She should maintain her careful distance from men in general and attractive, powerful men in particular. She should return to her accounts and her small, safe life and not risk complicating matters with whatever Damon Ashford had in mind. But she found herself nodding. 3 o'clock. I will have tea ready." "Excellent." Ashford's smile was warm and genuine, transforming his entire face. "Until then, Mrs. Hartwell, and thank you again for saving my horse. I suspect you may have saved far more than you know." He swung back into Midnight's saddle with athletic ease, tipped his hat to her with old-fashioned courtesy, and rode away before Pollyanna could question what exactly he had meant by that last cryptic statement. She stood for a moment watching him go, her heart beating faster than it should, her mind already racing with questions and possibilities and warnings. Then she shook herself firmly and turned toward the millinery shop. She had work to do, and only a few hours to complete it before Damon Ashford arrived at her cottage with his mysterious proposition. Whatever happened next, Pollyanna was certain of only one thing. Her carefully ordered life was about to become considerably more complicated. The afternoon sun slanted through the windows of Hartwell Cottage as Pollyanna set out her best tea service, a delicate porcelain set that had belonged to her mother, one of the few nice things she had managed to keep. Her hands trembled slightly as she arranged the cups, and she forced herself to take a steadying breath. She had changed into her best black dress, the one with the modest lace collar that Thomas had always said made her look respectable. The irony was not lost on her that she was preparing to receive a gentleman caller while wearing clothes designed to signal that she was not available for such attention. But then, Ashford had said this was about employment, about skills. Perhaps her widowhood would work in her favor for once, marking her as safe, unavailable for romantic entanglement. The knock came precisely at 3 o'clock, a firm, confident rap that somehow matched everything she had learned about Damon Ashford in their brief acquaintance. Pollyanna smoothed her skirts, touched her hair to ensure no strands had escaped her severe bun, and opened the door. Ashford stood on her small porch looking somehow larger and more vital than the modest surroundings could quite contain. He had changed from his riding clothes into a well-tailored suit of charcoal grey, and he held his hat in his hands with the polite attention of a man well-versed in social niceties. Behind him, as promised, stood a young groom holding the horses. "Mrs. Hartwell," Ashford said with a small bow, "thank you for receiving me. I hope I am not intruding on your time." "Not at all, Mr. Ashford. Please, come in." Pollyanna stepped back to admit him, very aware of how small her cottage must seem to a man who lived in the sprawling grandeur of Meadowbrook Estate. But if Ashford found her home diminished or quaint, he gave no sign of it. Instead, he looked around with apparent interest, taking in the neat parlor with its simple furniture and carefully tended houseplants, the books stacked beside the fireplace, the desk in the corner where her ledgers lay open. "You have made this very comfortable," he said, and there was no condescension in his tone. "It has the feeling of a true home rather than merely a house." "Thank you," Pollyanna said, surprised by the compliment. "Please, sit. I have tea ready." As she poured and they settled into the awkward ritual of refreshment and small talk, Pollyanna found herself studying Ashford more carefully. In the morning light on the road, he had seemed all vitality and action. Here in the quiet domesticity of her parlor, she could see other things. The faint shadows under his eyes that spoke of sleepless nights, the tight control he maintained over his posture and expression, as if relaxation was something he had forgotten how to permit himself. "You said you had a proposition," Pollyanna said finally, setting down her teacup with a decisive click. "I confess I am curious what sort of employment you imagine me suited for." Ashford set down his own cup and leaned forward slightly, his hands clasped between his knees. When he met her eyes, she saw something in his expression that looked almost vulnerable. "I will be direct, Mrs. Hartwell, as I believe you appreciate directness. Meadowbrook Estate is vast, Nearly 3,000 acres with 40 tenant families, extensive livestock and commercial interests in wool and grain. When my brother died 2 years ago, I inherited it all unexpectedly. I was the second son, you see. I was supposed to pursue law or the church, not manage an agricultural empire. He paused, seeming to gather his thoughts. I have thrown myself into learning the business, and I have good men helping me. A capable steward, experienced tenants, a competent household staff. But there is a gap, Mrs. Hartwell. A significant gap between the great house and the farms, between accounts and animals, between what I see from horseback and what truly happens in the tenant cottages. And you think I can fill this gap? Pollyanna asked, intrigued despite herself. I think you understand both worlds in a way that I do not, Ashford said honestly. You were born to gentility, but have lived a farmer's life. You have practical skills with livestock and crops, but you also understand accounts and management. You know what it is to make a small household run efficiently, to stretch limited resources. And this morning you demonstrated both courage and competence in a crisis. Pollyanna felt her cheeks warm at the praise, even as her practical mind identified the problem. Mr. Ashford, what you are describing sounds like the role of a steward's wife, or perhaps a housekeeper with expanded duties. But I am neither of those things. I am a widow living alone, and propriety would be fully observed, Ashford interrupted firmly. I am not proposing anything improper, Mrs. Hartwell. I am proposing employment with appropriate compensation and absolutely appropriate circumstances. You would visit tenant farms on a regular schedule, always accompanied by my head groom or another suitable chaperone. You would review accounts and make recommendations, yes, but always in an official capacity. You would be, for lack of a better term, my agricultural consultant. It was an unconventional role, perhaps even an unprecedented one. But as Pollyanna turned it over in her mind, she could see how it might work. More than that, she could feel something inside her responding to the challenge, to the possibility of using her skills for something beyond mere survival. What would be the compensation, she asked, because she needed to be practical, even as hope fluttered dangerously in her chest. Ashford named a sum that made her eyes widen. It was more than generous, it was transformative. With that income, she could pay off her debts, secure her cottage, perhaps even save for a future beyond constant financial anxiety. That seems excessive for what you're describing, she said carefully. What is it you are not telling me, Mr. Ashford? For a long moment, Ashford simply looked at her, and Pollyanna had the unsettling sensation that he was making some final decision, weighing whether to trust her with the full truth. There is one more element, he said finally, one that makes this arrangement more complicated, but also, I believe, more beneficial for both of us. Pollyanna waited, her heart beating faster. Mrs. Hartwell, I am 26 years old and single. I have been single for 2 years since inheriting Meadowbrook, and in that time I have been subjected to every matchmaking scheme Yorkshire can devise. Mothers present their daughters at every social function. Invitations multiply to dinners where I am conveniently seated beside some eligible young lady. My life has become a constant exercise in polite evasion. Despite her nervousness, Pollyanna felt a small smile tug at her lips. I imagine that must be very trying for you. You laugh, but it is genuinely exhausting, Ashford said, though there was a hint of humor in his own eyes now. I am not ready to marry, Mrs. Hartwell. Perhaps I will never be ready. I saw what marriage did to my parents, how it became a cage of obligation and resentment rather than partnership. I have no desire to repeat their mistakes. I understand something of that myself, Pollyanna admitted quietly. My own marriage was not what I had hoped. Then perhaps you can understand my proposal in its entirety. Ashford took a breath. I would like to employ you, yes, but I would also like your presence to serve a dual purpose. A young widow of good character working in an official capacity at Meadowbrook would be perfectly respectable. But her presence would also send a subtle message that my attention is engaged elsewhere, that I am not available for the marriage market's machinations. You want to use me as a shield, Pollyanna said slowly. Not quite a scandal, but enough suggestion of what? Interest? Attachment? Not interest, Ashford corrected carefully. Simply a professional connection that happens to satisfy social conventions about my time and attention being appropriately occupied. You would lose nothing. Your reputation would remain intact, your independence preserved. But I would gain some relief from constant social siege. It was cleverly done, Pollyanna had to admit. She would be his employee, nothing more. But the appearance of regular contact would be enough to discourage the most aggressive matchmaking mamas. And if anyone questioned the propriety of their working relationship, the answer was simple. She was a respectable widow, he was employing her professional skills, all interactions were properly chaperoned. "And when you do decide to marry," she asked, "or when you tire of this arrangement, then we part as amicably as we began," Ashford said simply, "with fair notice and full payment of anything owed. I would not leave you worse off than you are now, Mrs. Hartwell. That I can promise you absolutely." Pollyanna rose and walked to the window, looking out over her small garden to the hills beyond. This was a risk, undeniably. She would be tying her reputation to Ashford's, stepping into a role that had no clear precedent or protection. If he proved less honorable than he seemed, if gossip turned vicious, if any number of things went wrong, she could find herself in a position far worse than her current poverty. But if it worked, she could be free. Free of debt, free of constant financial anxiety, free to use her skills and intelligence for something meaningful. And Ashford would be free too, in his way, free from the suffocating expectations of a society that saw him only as a prize to be won. She turned back to face him. "I have one condition. Name it. Absolute honesty between us. No games, no deception, no calculations. If you are my employer, then I will give you my best work and my honest counsel. But I require the same in return. No charming evasions, no polite half-truths. If this arrangement becomes untenable for any reason, we speak of it directly, rather than allowing resentment to build." Something flickered across Ashford's face. Surprise, perhaps, or relief. He stood and crossed to where she waited by the window, extending his hand in a gesture that was more businessman than gentleman. "Agreed," he said firmly. "Absolute honesty, Mrs. Hartwell. I believe we have a partnership." Pollyanna took his hand, feeling the warm strength of his grip, the calluses that marked him as a man who did not merely oversee his estate, but worked it. For a moment they stood there, hands clasped, eyes meeting, and she felt something pass between them, an understanding, perhaps, or simply an acknowledgement that they were both taking a leap of faith into unknown territory. "When would you like me to begin?" she asked. "Tomorrow, if you're able. I have a meeting with several tenants about drainage issues in the West Fields, and I would value your perspective. Afterwards, we could review the estate accounts and you could begin to familiarize yourself with how things are currently managed." "Tomorrow, then," Pollyanna agreed. "I will be ready." Ashford released her hand, though his eyes remained on her face. "Mrs. Hartwell, Pollyanna, if I may, I believe this may be the wisest decision I have made since inheriting Meadowbrook. Thank you for taking the chance. Thank you for offering it," she said softly. "You have no idea what this means to me." "Perhaps I do," he said, his voice equally quiet. "Perhaps we both understand more than we are saying about the cages that circumstance can build, and perhaps together we can find a way to be free." He left shortly after, and Pollyanna stood at her window watching him ride away on midnight, the stallion now calm and obedient under his firm but gentle hand. The autumn sun was beginning to descend toward the hills, painting everything in shades of gold and amber, and for the first time in longer than she could remember, Pollyanna felt something that might have been hope. She had no illusions that this would be simple. She knew that Damon Ashford was more complicated than their brief acquaintance revealed, that working closely with him would present challenges she could not yet anticipate. She knew that village gossip would sharpen its knives the moment word spread of her new position, but she also knew that she was tired of being afraid, tired of making herself small and unobtrusive in the hope that life would be kinder if she demanded less from it. Damon Ashford had offered her a chance to be useful, to be valued for her skills rather than pitied for her circumstances. She would take that chance, whatever came of it. Tomorrow she would ride to Meadowbrook Estate and begin her new role. Tomorrow her life would change in ways she could not predict. But tonight she would simply sit in her small cottage and let herself feel the unfamiliar sensation of possibility opening before her like a door into sunlight. The future, for the first time in a very long while, looked bright. The morning arrived grey and misty, typical of Yorkshire autumns, but Pollyanna woke with a strange lightness in her chest that even the dreary weather could not diminish. She dressed carefully in her most practical black dress, pinned her hair securely, and packed a small satchel with a notebook and pencils. At precisely 8 o'clock, she heard hooves on the road outside her cottage. The groom Ashford had sent was a grizzled man of perhaps 50, with kind eyes and a no-nonsense manner that immediately put Pollyanna at ease. He introduced himself as John Weatherby, head groom at Meadowbrook for 30 years, and helped her onto a gentle grey mare without comment or condescension. "Mr. Ashford thought Silver Mist here would suit you, ma'am," John said, as they started down the road. "She's got a sweet temperament, and she's steady on rough ground. Knows these lands like the back of her hoof, if you'll pardon the expression." "She's lovely," Pollyanna said, feeling the mare's smooth gait beneath her. "Mr. Ashford has excellent judgment in horseflesh." "That he does, ma'am, that he does." John was quiet for a moment, then added carefully, "Begging your pardon, Mrs. Hartwell, but the staff at Meadowbrook, we're glad Mr. Ashford's brought someone in with sense about them. Estate's been needing a woman's eye on certain matters, if you take my meaning." Pollyanna did take his meaning, and she felt a small warmth at the acceptance implicit in his words. She had worried that the Meadowbrook staff might resent an outsider, particularly one of such modest origins, but John's respectful manner suggested otherwise. The ride to Meadowbrook took 40 minutes, winding through increasingly well-maintained roads until they passed through an impressive stone gatehouse and onto the estate proper. Pollyanna had heard of Meadowbrook's grandeur, but seeing it was something else entirely. The main house rose 3 stories in golden stone, its proportions elegant without being ostentatious. But it was the land that truly took her breath. Rolling fields as far as she could see, dotted with sheep and cattle, divided by ancient hedgerows and stone walls, tenant cottages nestled in clusters near well-kept barns. In the distance, she could see labourers working the fields despite the early hour, and closer by the vast stables and outbuildings that served the estate's agricultural operations. This was what Ashford managed. This empire of land and livestock, of families and fortunes all interconnected. The weight of such responsibility suddenly felt staggering. Ashford met them at the stable yard, already dressed for riding in a coat of dark green that somehow made his eyes look more green than grey this morning. When he saw her, his face lit with a smile that seemed genuinely pleased. "Mrs. Hartwell, welcome to Meadowbrook. I trust the ride was comfortable?" "Very much so, thank you. Silver Mist is a delightful mare. I'm glad you approve. I thought we might begin with a tour of the home farm, then meet with the Thorntons about the drainage issue. After luncheon, I'll introduce you to Mr. Pembroke, my steward, and you can begin familiarizing yourself with how we manage the accounts." It was a full day's work he had planned, and Pollyanna appreciated that he was not easing her into the position, but rather throwing her directly into the complexities of estate management. It suggested he truly valued her input, rather than simply using her as decorative cover for his social maneuvering. The morning passed in a blur of activity. Ashford showed her the dairy operations, where a dozen cows were being milked by efficient maids who curtsied but barely paused in their work. He explained the rotation of crops in the fields, the schedule for shearing and lambing, the delicate balance of keeping enough livestock to profit without overtaxing the land. But what impressed Pollyanna most was how he spoke to the workers. There was no condescension in his manner, no lordly distance. He knew their names, asked after their families, listened carefully when they raised concerns about equipment or weather, or the 100 small things that could make the difference between a good harvest and a failed one. "You're not what I expected," Pollyanna said as they rode between fields, John trailing at a discreet distance behind them. "The village says you're a hard man in business, yet I see nothing but fairness and attention." Ashford's expression grew more serious. "The village also says I'm a charming wastrel who refuses to marry and settle down. I have learned not to trust village gossip overmuch, Mrs. Hartwell. Yes, I am firm in business, I have to be, but firmness and cruelty are not the same thing. My tenants work hard. They deserve fair treatment and honest dealing in return." "And your refusal to marry, is that also not as the village believes?" She saw him stiffen slightly in the saddle, then deliberately relax, They had agreed to honesty after all. "The village believes I am a rake who enjoys my freedom too much to give it up," he said carefully. "The truth is more complicated. I watched my parents' marriage destroy them both slowly over 20 years. My father was cold and controlling, my mother resentful and bitter. They stayed together for duty and appearances, and it poisoned everything they touched. I swore I would never enter such an arrangement, not for love or money or dynasty." "Yet you must marry eventually," Pollyanna said gently. "You need an heir for all this." She gestured at the fields around them. "Perhaps, or perhaps I leave it to a cousin, or perhaps—" He stopped himself, shook his head. "Forgive me. This is not appropriate conversation for a working relationship." "You promised me honesty," Pollyanna reminded him, "and I think understanding your perspective will help me serve you better in this role." Ashford looked at her for a long moment, those grey-green eyes searching her face as if trying to determine how much truth she could handle. "Very well. The truth is that I am not opposed to marriage in principle. I am opposed to the kind of marriage that society expects, where a wife is decorative, obedient, useful for producing heirs and managing households, but not truly a partner. I have no interest in a woman who will smile and agree with everything I say. I want—" He paused, seeming to search for words. "I want what I have never seen, a true partnership, someone who will challenge me, work beside me, share the burden of all this, rather than simply benefiting from it." "That is asking a great deal," Pollyanna said softly. "Most women of your class are not raised to be partners. They are raised to be ornaments. I know, which is why I remain unmarried and likely will continue to do so, and why your presence here is so valuable to me. You provide the appearance of appropriate social engagement without the trap of actual romantic entanglement." There was something almost sad in his voice, Pollyanna thought, as if he had resigned himself to loneliness rather than risk the wrong kind of connection. She understood that feeling perhaps better than he knew. They reached the Thornton farm just before midday. The Thorntons were a family of 6, father, mother, and 4 sturdy sons ranging from 8 to 18. Their cottage was neat, their fields productive, but Mr. Thornton's weathered face was creased with worry as he led them to the west field where water pooled in great muddy patches, despite the lack of recent rain. "It's the drainage, sir," Mr. Thornton explained to Ashford. "Been getting worse these past 3 years. We lose near a quarter of the field to standing water come spring, and it spreads farther each season. I've tried ditching it myself, but the water just finds new places to collect." Ashford examined the field with the focused attention Pollyanna was beginning to recognize as characteristic. But then he turned to her with an expression of expectation. "Mrs. Hartwell, your assessment?" Pollyanna felt every eye turn to her. Ashford's, John's, the Thorntons' curious and somewhat skeptical gazes. This was a test, she realized, not of her knowledge necessarily, but of her courage to speak up in front of men who might resent her input. She walked carefully around the flooded area, noting the slope of the land, the condition of the soil, the way water had carved small channels through the earth. Then she looked up toward the higher ground, where a hedgerow marked the boundary with the next field. "Mr. Thornton, what's beyond that hedgerow?" "That's the Crow property, ma'am. Mr. Edmund Crow's land." Pollyanna filed away that name, Crow, the ambitious neighbor who wanted to expand his holdings. "And has Mr. Crow done any work on his side of that boundary in recent years? Ditching, perhaps, or changes to his fields?" Mr. Thornton's eyes widened. "Why, yes, ma'am. 3 years back he had extensive ditching done, said he was improving his drainage." "I suspect he succeeded," Pollyanna said dryly, "and in doing so he redirected his water problem onto your land. Look here." She pointed to where the ground sloped ever so slightly toward them from the hedgerow. "His ditches are channeling water down into your field. It's not your drainage that's the problem. It's his drainage creating a new problem for you." Ashford's face had gone very still, but Pollyanna could see anger flickering in his eyes, the same cold, controlled anger she had glimpsed when he discovered Midnight's injuries. "Can we redirect it?" he asked her directly. "Yes, but not by ditching on this side. We need to install a proper culvert system to carry the water through the field to a natural drainage point. It's not a small undertaking, but it's the only permanent solution unless you can convince Mr. Crow to modify his system." "I can and will convince him," Ashford said, his voice carrying an edge that made even Mr. Thornton look nervous. "But the culvert is the better long-term solution regardless. Mr. Thornton, I'll have the work done before spring planting. And I'll be having words with Mr. Crow about neighborly responsibility." As they rode away from the Thornton farm, Pollyanna could feel tension radiating from Ashford like heat from a forge. "Edmund Crow," he said, almost spitting the name. "I should have known. The man has been trying to purchase portions of Meadowbrook's land for 2 years, making increasingly aggressive offers. When I refused, he began this campaign of small encroachments, moving fence lines, redirecting water, allowing his sheep to accidentally graze on our pastures. He's testing me, seeing if I'll fight or fold." "Then you must fight," Pollyanna said firmly, but carefully. "Men like that thrive on provocation. If you respond with emotion, he'll use it against you." Ashford turned to look at her, surprise clear on his face. "You speak as if you know such men." "I do. My late husband had dealings with his sort. They smile and offer friendship, while slowly taking everything you have, piece by piece, until you wake one day to discover you've been stripped bare." There was more there, Pollyanna knew, more bitterness from her marriage than she had intended to reveal. But Ashford did not press. Instead, he simply nodded. "Then I am fortunate to have your counsel. We'll address Crow's interference, but strategically. For now, let's see about that luncheon I promised you." Luncheon was served in a small dining room that Ashford explained he used for business meetings, more intimate than the grand formal dining room, but still appropriate for entertaining guests. The meal was simple but excellent: fresh bread, roasted chicken, vegetables from the estate's gardens. As they ate, Ashford asked her opinion on everything they had seen that morning, listening carefully to her observations and occasionally making notes in a small leather-bound book. "You have a gift for seeing the larger patterns," he said as they finished the meal. "Most people look at a flooded field and see only the immediate problem. You saw the source and the solution in minutes." "I have had practice managing on limited resources," Pollyanna said. "When you cannot afford to waste anything, you learn to trace problems to their roots rather than merely treating symptoms. A valuable skill for estate management as well. Speaking of which, shall we tackle those account books? I warn you, they may be rather dry after the excitement of the morning." But Pollyanna found the accounts fascinating rather than dull. Mr. Pembroke, the steward, was a precise man in his 60s who kept immaculate records, but who also welcomed her questions with surprising warmth. "It's a pleasure to work with someone who understands numbers, Mrs. Hartwell," he said, as he guided her through the complex system of income and expenses. "Mr. Ashford has a head for the business, but he's always approached it from the land side rather than the books side. Having someone who can bridge both perspectives, well, that's been sorely needed." As the afternoon wore on, Pollyanna began to see the full scope of what Ashford managed. The estate brought in significant income from wool, grain, and livestock sales, but the expenses were equally substantial: repairs, wages, supplies, taxes, investments in new equipment and improvements. It was a delicate balance, and she could see where inefficiencies had crept in, where better management might improve margins without cutting into quality or fair wages. She was deep in examining the feed costs for the livestock when she felt rather than saw Ashford enter the room. She looked up to find him leaning against the doorframe, watching her with an expression she could not quite read. "You've been at it for 3 hours without pause," he said. "I think that's enough for one day, don't you?" Pollyanna blinked, surprised to see how the light had shifted. "I didn't realize the time. I'm sorry. I hope I haven't kept Mr. Pembroke from other duties." "Not at all, ma'am," Pembroke said warmly. "It's been a pleasure. I look forward to your insights when you've had time to review everything." As Ashford walked her back toward the stables where John was waiting with Silver Mist, the evening air had turned cool and the sky was streaking with orange and purple. "You impressed Pembroke," Ashford said. "He's not easily impressed. He served my father for 30 years and survived by being cautious about new approaches. I like him. He's thorough without being rigid. That's rare. Rather like someone else I recently employed." Ashford's tone was light, almost teasing. "Mrs. Hartwell, I wonder if you might be willing to join me at the Harvest Assembly this Saturday." It's a significant social event. All the local landowners and their families, tenants, village worthies. As my agricultural consultant, your presence would be entirely appropriate, and it would save me from at least a dozen calculated introductions to eligible young ladies. Pollyanna hesitated. A public appearance at his side would cement her role in the eyes of local society. There would be talk, speculation, gossip, but that was part of their arrangement, wasn't it? And more than that, she found herself wanting to go, wanting to spend more time in Ashford's surprisingly good company. "I have nothing suitable to wear to such an event," she said finally. "My mourning clothes are hardly festive. You're a widow. No one expects you to wear bright colors. And besides, you would grace any gathering regardless of what you wore." The compliment was delivered matter-of-factly, without the oily charm of practiced seduction. Ashford stated it as simple truth, then continued, "But if you're concerned, I can have my housekeeper assist you. She's an excellent judge of such things and won't make you feel uncomfortable." "Very well," Pollyanna said, making the decision. "I'll attend the assembly with you." Ashford's smile was genuinely pleased. "Excellent. I'll send a carriage for you at 6 o'clock Saturday evening. And Mrs. Hartwell, thank you for today, for your insights, for taking this chance. I think we're going to accomplish good things together." As Pollyanna rode home through the gathering dusk, John Weatherby once again trailing at a respectful distance, she found herself replaying the day in her mind. The work had been engaging, the challenges interesting, and Ashford himself had been, what? Respectful, certainly, intelligent and attentive, but also something more. There had been moments when their eyes met over an account book or while discussing the Thornton farm, where she felt a spark of connection that had nothing to do with employment and everything to do with simple human understanding. It was dangerous, that spark. Pollyanna was self-aware enough to recognize it. She could not afford to develop feelings for Damon Ashford. He had been clear about his intentions. He wanted a partnership in work, nothing more. He did not believe in romantic love, did not want the complications of a real relationship. She was his employee and his social shield, and that was all she could ever be. But as she settled Silvermist in her small stable and walked into her cottage, she caught sight of her reflection in the hallway mirror and barely recognized the woman looking back at her. Her eyes were bright, her cheeks flushed from the ride and the cool air. She looked alive in a way she had not looked in years. Employment was making her happy, that was all. The work, the challenge, the use of her skills, these things were bringing her back to life. It had nothing to do with the way Ashford listened when she spoke, or the respect in his eyes when she offered an insight, or the warmth of his rare smiles. Nothing at all. The rest of the week passed in a flurry of activity. Pollyanna visited Meadowbrook twice more, each time accompanied by John Weatherby, learning more about the estate's operations and beginning to compile a report on inefficiencies she had identified. She met more of the tenant families, listened to their concerns, observed their operations with the careful eye she had developed managing her own small household on limited means. And she saw Ashford, always in professional contexts, always properly chaperoned but with increasing frequency and growing ease. They developed a rhythm of conversation that felt natural. He would present a problem, she would offer observations, they would debate solutions with a frankness that seemed to surprise and please them both. On Thursday afternoon, as Pollyanna was reviewing grain storage costs in Pembroke's office, a commotion arose in the yard below. She looked out the window to see a fine carriage bearing an unfamiliar crest, and stepping down from it was a portly man in his 40s, with thinning hair and an expression of practiced geniality that immediately set her on guard. "That's Edmund Crowe," Pembroke said quietly from beside her. "I wonder what brings him to Meadowbrook uninvited." Pollyanna watched as Ashford emerged from the stables, his expression carefully neutral, to greet his unwelcome visitor. Even from this distance, she could see the tension in his shoulders, the controlled precision of his movements. "Should we make ourselves scarce?" she asked Pembroke. "On the contrary, Mrs. Hartwell. I suspect Mr. Ashford might appreciate a witness to whatever Mr. Crowe has come to say. Shall we take a turn in the garden, one that happens to pass near where they're standing?" Pollyanna appreciated Pembroke's circumspect approach. Together they descended to the garden, ostensibly examining the late-season roses, while remaining well within earshot of Ashford and Crow's conversation. "Merely a neighbourly call," Crow was saying, in a voice that carried across the garden with practiced volume. "I heard you'd brought on a consultant of sorts. Wanted to offer my congratulations. It's so important to have good help, don't you think?" "Mrs. Hartwell is an employee, not a servant," Ashford said coolly, "and a valued one. But I doubt you've come all this way to discuss my staffing decisions." No, of course not. Actually, I wanted to renew my offer for the West parcels. I know you've refused in the past, but I'm prepared to be quite generous. The land borders mine, after all, and I could put it to better use than, well, no offense to your tenant farming approach, but commercial agriculture does require scale. "The West parcels are not for sale," Ashford said flatly, "nor are any other portions of Meadowbrook. I've made this clear repeatedly, Mr. Crow." "Come now, Ashford, you're a businessman. Surely you understand the value of a good offer. And with a young widow to support now, well, expenses do add up, don't they? I'm merely trying to help a neighbor." Pollyanna felt her cheeks burn with anger. So that was Crow's game, to suggest that Ashford needed money and to imply that her presence was financial burden rather than business asset. Before she could think better of it, she stepped forward into the conversation, Pembroke following with an expression of suppressed approval. "Mr. Ashford," she said clearly, "I've finished reviewing the grain storage accounts. The savings I identified should offset my salary 3 times over within the first year. Shall I prepare a full report, or would you prefer an executive summary?" Ashford's eyes met hers, and she saw surprise flicker there, followed by something that looked like gratitude and perhaps amusement at her boldness. "An executive summary will do for now, Mrs. Hartwell. Mr. Crow, allow me to introduce my agricultural consultant, Mrs. Pollyanna Hartwell. Mrs. Hartwell, this is our neighbor, Mr. Edmund Crow." Crow's expression had gone tight, his genial mask slipping for just a moment to reveal calculation and displeasure beneath. But he recovered quickly, bowing over Pollyanna's hand with exaggerated courtesy. "Mrs. Hartwell, how delightful to meet you. I was not aware that Ashford had brought in someone with such comprehensive responsibilities. I had understood you were merely helping with some household accounts." "Your understanding was incomplete," Pollyanna said with icy politeness. "I consult on all aspects of estate management, including agricultural operations, tenant relations, and resource optimization. Mr. Ashford values diverse perspectives in decision-making." "How modern of him," Crow said, and there was an edge to his voice now, "though I do wonder what the county will make of such an unusual arrangement. A young widow working so closely with an unmarried gentleman, even with the best intentions, tongues will wag, won't they? If you're finding this story captivating, why not subscribe to the channel? And here's something different. Imagine you were in Pollyanna's position, facing someone like Edmund Crow. What would you say to defend your professional dignity? Drop your response in the comments. I'd love to see your creative comebacks. Now, let's see how Pollyanna handles this." "Then let them wag," Ashford said, his voice dropping to a register that made even Pollyanna's spine stiffen with warning. "I am not concerned with gossip, Mr. Crow. I am concerned with managing my estate effectively and treating my employees with the respect they deserve. If you have come merely to make veiled insinuations, then I believe this conversation has concluded." "No insinuation intended, I assure you," Crow said, though his smile had gone shark-like. "I'm simply concerned for your reputation, and for Mrs. Hartwell's, of course. A widow's standing is such a delicate thing. One wouldn't want anything to damage it further." It was a threat, thinly veiled. Pollyanna felt ice settle in her stomach, even as anger flared hot in her chest. Before she could formulate a response, Ashford stepped forward, placing himself slightly between her and Crow. "Mrs. Hartwell's reputation is impeccable, and anyone who suggests otherwise will answer to me personally. As for my own reputation, I care far less about village gossip than I do about honest business practices. Speaking of which, I believe we need to discuss your drainage modifications and their impact on my tenants' fields." Crow's expression shifted again, surprise, then wariness. "I don't know what you're referring to." "The ditching you did 3 years ago on your western boundary. The work that redirected your water problems onto Thomas Thornton's land, destroying a quarter of his productive acreage. I'll be having that corrected at your expense, Mr. Crow, and if you wish to dispute the matter, we can take it before the magistrate with a full survey of the water flow." For a long moment, Crow simply stared at Ashford, clearly recalculating. Then he glanced at Pollyanna, and she saw understanding dawn in his eyes. She had been the one to identify the problem. "A simple misunderstanding, I'm sure," Crow said finally, his voice strained. "I'll have my man review the drainage situation." "You do that. And while you're at it, review your property lines as well. I've had reports of your sheep grazing on Meadowbrook land. I'm sure that's another simple misunderstanding." Crow's face had gone red now, all pretense of geniality abandoned. "You're making an enemy, Ashford. I have influence in this county, and I have right on my side, along with detailed records and witnesses to your encroachments. Choose your next actions carefully, Mr. Crow. I am not my father, easily intimidated or willing to let matters slide for the sake of false peace. Good day." It was a dismissal so absolute that even Crow could not pretend to misunderstand it. He climbed back into his carriage with barely a farewell, and the driver whipped the horses into motion with unnecessary force. As the carriage disappeared down the drive, Ashford turned to Pollyanna with an expression that mixed anger, admiration, and something else she could not quite name. "That was either very brave or very foolish," he said. "You made an enemy today, Mrs. Hartwell." "We made an enemy," she corrected. "The moment I identified his drainage scheme, I became a threat to his plans. Better to face him directly than pretend we don't see what he's doing." "Pembroke," Ashford said, turning to his steward, "I want a complete survey of our shared boundaries with Crow's property, and I want documentation of every instance of encroachment. If he wants war, we'll fight it with facts and law." "Already compiling it, sir," Pembroke said with grim satisfaction. "I've been waiting for you to take the gloves off with that man for 2 years now." After Pembroke departed, Ashford and Pollyanna stood in the garden as afternoon shadows lengthened around them. The confrontation had left her shaking slightly with adrenaline, and she wrapped her arms around herself against a chill that had nothing to do with temperature. "He'll retaliate," she said quietly. "Men like that always do. And he was right about one thing. My reputation is vulnerable. If he spreads the right rumors, suggests impropriety between us, then we fight that too," Ashford said firmly. He took a step closer, and Pollyanna found herself looking up into eyes that blazed with something fierce and protective. "I will not let him destroy you for having the courage to speak truth. I swear it, Pollyanna." It was the first time he had used her given name without the formal Mrs., and the intimacy of it sent a shiver through her that had nothing to do with fear. They stood close enough that she could see the pulse beating at his throat, could smell the faint scent of sandalwood and horses, and autumn that seemed to cling to him. "Damon," she said, testing his name on her tongue for the first time. "We need to be careful. If Crow does start spreading rumors, we need to be above reproach." "We are above reproach," he said, but his voice had gone slightly rough. "We have done nothing wrong. We are employer and employee, nothing more." "Nothing more," Pollyanna echoed, but even as she said it, she knew it was becoming a lie. Because standing there in the garden with the sunset painting everything gold and amber, with Damon Ashford looking at her as if she were brave and valuable and worth protecting, Pollyanna felt something shift inside her chest, something dangerous and wonderful and terrifying all at once. She was beginning to care for him. Not as employer, not as business partner, but as a man who listened when she spoke and trusted her judgment and made her feel alive for the first time in years. It was the worst possible thing that could happen, and she had absolutely no idea how to stop it. Saturday evening arrived with unseasonable warmth, as if autumn had decided to grant one last gift before winter's approach. Pollyanna stood before her small mirror, hardly recognizing the woman reflected there. Ashford's housekeeper, Mrs. Davies, had indeed proven to have excellent taste. The dress she had helped Pollyanna acquire was still black, still appropriate for mourning, but it was cut in the latest fashion with elegant lines that somehow made Pollyanna look both respectable and unexpectedly sophisticated. Her hair was arranged in a softer style than her usual severe bun, with a few dark blonde curls framing her face. She looked, she thought with some surprise, almost pretty. Not the faded widow struggling to survive, but a woman of substance and capability. The carriage arrived precisely at 6, driven by John Weatherby, who offered her a rare smile of approval as he helped her inside. The interior was comfortable without being ostentatious, and Pollyanna spent the drive to the assembly hall trying to calm her racing heart. This was a performance, she reminded herself. She was attending as Ashford's employee, nothing more. The fact that her pulse quickened at the thought of seeing him was irrelevant. The fact that she had caught herself thinking about him at odd moments throughout the week, his rare smiles, the intensity of his focus when discussing estate matters, the way his eyes had blazed when defending her against Crow, all of that was simply the natural result of working closely with someone intelligent and passionate about their work. Nothing more. The assembly hall in the village of Thornbridge was already crowded when they arrived. Pollyanna could see the local gentry in their finest clothes, landowners and their families, the vicar and his wife, merchants who had done well enough to claim respectability, and scattered among them, tenant farmers in their Sunday best, allowed to attend the harvest celebration as reward for the year's labor. Ashford was waiting near the entrance, and when he saw her, his expression shifted in a way that made her breath catch. He looked at her not as employer to employee, but as a man seeing a woman who had somehow exceeded his expectations. "Mrs. Hartwell," he said, bowing over her hand with perfect propriety, even as his eyes held hers a moment longer than strictly necessary. "You look lovely this evening." "Thank you, Mr. Ashford. The dress is courtesy of Mrs. Davies's excellent judgment." "Mrs." Davies chose well, but she had fine material to work with. He offered his arm. "Shall we? I warn you, we're about to become the subject of intense scrutiny and probably considerable gossip." He was right. The moment they entered the main hall together, Pollyanna felt every eye turn toward them. She heard the whispers start immediately, not loud enough to distinguish words, but the tone was clear. Curiosity, speculation, and from some quarters, disapproval. But Ashford seemed entirely unbothered by the attention. He guided her through the room with easy confidence, introducing her to person after person as "my agricultural consultant, Mrs. Hartwell," with enough casual authority that most people simply accepted the unconventional arrangement rather than questioning it openly. Most, but not all. "Ashford, what a surprise," came a saccharine voice from behind them. Pollyanna turned to find a striking woman of perhaps 25, beautifully dressed in rose silk that set off her dark hair and fair complexion. Beside her stood an older woman, who could only be her mother, eyeing Pollyanna with barely concealed hostility. "Miss Lettice," Ashford said with polite coolness. "Mrs. Lettice, may I introduce Mrs. Hartwell? She's recently begun consulting for Meadowbrook on agricultural matters." "How unusual," Miss Lettice said, her smile sharp as glass. "I had not realized farming required such specialized female expertise. Tell me, Mrs. Hartwell, what exactly does an agricultural consultant do?" It was a trap, meant to embarrass or diminish her, but Pollyanna had faced worse than social cattiness. "I review estate operations for inefficiencies, assess tenant needs, analyze crop rotation and livestock management systems, and maintain oversight of account reconciliation as it pertains to agricultural income and expenses," Pollyanna said calmly. "Much like a steward, but with particular focus on integrating household management principles with larger-scale farming operations." Mrs. Lettice's eyes narrowed. "How very comprehensive. One wonders that Mr. Ashford requires such assistance when he has a perfectly good steward already. One would wonder many things if one lacked understanding of modern estate management," Ashford said, with a pleasantness that did not quite hide the steel beneath. "Progress requires embracing new approaches rather than clinging to outdated methods. Now, if you'll excuse us, I promised Mrs. Hartwell I would introduce her to the vicar." As they moved away, Pollyanna let out a breath she had not realized she was holding. "I take it Miss Lettice is one of the eligible young ladies whose mothers have plans for you." "Her mother has had plans for 5 years now," Ashford said dryly. "Plans which have grown more aggressive since I inherited Meadowbrook. Miss Lettice herself is pleasant enough when her mother is not orchestrating things, but I have no interest in becoming a trophy husband for a social climbing family." The evening progressed in a blur of introductions, careful conversations, and the constant awareness of being watched. Pollyanna met tenant families she had visited during the week, who greeted her with surprising warmth. She spoke with the vicar's wife about the parish accounts. Apparently her reputation for numerical skill had spread. She endured the subtle cuts and veiled insinuations of several society matrons who clearly saw her as either competition or inappropriate. And through it all she was aware of Ashford beside her, his hand occasionally at her elbow guiding her through the crowd, his voice intervening when conversations turned too pointed, his presence a steady anchor in the social storm. When the dancing began, Pollyanna expected to retreat to the sidelines. She was in mourning, dancing would be improper, but Ashford had other ideas. A widow of more than a year may dance at a harvest assembly without scandal, he said quietly, offering his hand. And I confess I have been looking forward to this all evening. Pollyanna hesitated only a moment before placing her hand in his. The touch sent warmth racing up her arm, and when he led her onto the floor for a waltz, she felt as if she was stepping off a cliff into unknown territory. His hand settled at her waist, proper, and yet somehow intimate. Her hand rested on his shoulder, feeling the solid strength of him beneath the fine fabric of his coat. And then they were moving, swept into the music, and Pollyanna discovered that Damon Ashford danced the way he rode, with athletic grace and absolute confidence. "You dance well," she said, focusing on the music rather than the way his eyes seemed to see straight through her careful defenses. "My mother insisted on lessons, despite my father's protests that they were frivolous. It was one of the few battles she won." His expression softened slightly. "She loved to dance. It was the only time I saw her truly happy." "I'm sorry you lost her," Pollyanna said gently. "And I am sorry for your losses as well. But perhaps—" He paused, and when he continued, his voice was lower, meant only for her. "Perhaps we are both learning that loss does not have to be the end of everything, that there can be new beginnings if we're brave enough to reach for them." Pollyanna's heart hammered against her ribs. They were still speaking of estate management and business partnerships, surely. Not anything more personal. Not the way her skin felt electric where his hand rested at her waist, or the way she wanted nothing more than to close the remaining distance between them until there was no space left at all. "Damon," she began, not sure what she intended to say. But before she could continue, there was a commotion at the edge of the dance floor. The music stuttered to a halt, and couples turned toward the disturbance with varying expressions of concern and curiosity. Edmund Crowe stood near the refreshment table, his face flushed with drink and something uglier. Beside him stood a thin, sour-faced man Pollyanna did not recognize, but whose expression of malicious satisfaction sent ice down her spine. "Ashford," Crowe called out, his voice carrying across the suddenly silent hall. "A word, if you please, about business matters." "This is hardly the time or place," Ashford said evenly, though Pollyanna could feel tension coiling through his body like a spring wound too tight. "Oh, I think it's precisely the time," Crowe said. He swayed slightly, confirming Pollyanna's suspicion that he had been drinking heavily. "See, my associate here, Mr. Blackwood, has some interesting information about your Mrs. Hartwell, information the good people of this county should know before they embrace such an unusual arrangement." Pollyanna felt the blood drain from her face. Blackwood. She knew that name. He had been one of Thomas's creditors, one of the men who had circled after her husband's death, like vultures scenting carrion. "Mr. Crowe, you are drunk and making a scene," Ashford said, his voice cold enough to frost glass. "I suggest you leave before you say something you will regret." "Regret? No, I think truth should be spoken." Crowe gestured grandly to the watching crowd. "Did you all know that the virtuous Mrs. Hartwell owes substantial debts from her late husband's estate? Debts that remain unpaid, making her presence in respectable company somewhat questionable. And now here she is, working intimately with an unmarried gentleman, living on his charity while wearing fine new clothes. One does wonder exactly what services she provides to merit such generosity." The implication was clear and vile. Pollyanna felt as if she had been struck, the words hitting her like physical blows. Around them she heard gasps, saw faces turning toward her with expressions ranging from shock to prurient curiosity to satisfied vindication. She wanted to flee, to run from the hall and never return. But before she could move, Ashford stepped forward, placing himself between her and Crow with deliberate precision. "You will apologize," Ashford said, his voice deadly quiet. "Now, to Mrs. Hartwell and to everyone in this room for subjecting them to your drunken slander." "Slander?" Crow laughed, an ugly sound. "I speak only truth. Mr. Blackwood here holds notes against the Hartwell estate totaling nearly £200. Mrs. Hartwell has been dodging payment for months, and now suddenly she appears at Meadowbrook, dressed far above her station, parading around as your consultant." He invested the word with obscene suggestion. "What else are we to think?" "You are to think," Ashford said with icy precision, "that Mrs. Hartwell is my employee, compensated fairly for valuable work that has already saved this estate more than her salary 3 times over. You are to think that her personal finances are none of your concern or anyone else's. And you are to think very carefully about the consequences of publicly impugning a respectable widow's honor in front of witnesses." "Honor?" Crow sneered. "What honor does she have left? A farmer's widow grasping at a gentleman far above her reach." "Enough!" The word cracked like a whip, and Pollyanna was startled to realize it had come from the vicar, who had pushed forward through the crowd with surprising authority. "Mr. Crow, you disgrace yourself and this assembly with such vile insinuations. Mrs. Hartwell has done work for the parish these past months with utmost propriety and skill. Her character is beyond reproach." "Is it?" Blackwood spoke for the first time, his voice oily and satisfied. "Then perhaps she should explain why she has refused to honor her late husband's debts that are legal and binding." Pollyanna found her voice at last, though it shook with the effort of control. "I have not refused to honor anything, Mr. Blackwood. I have repeatedly requested documentation and accounting of the debts you claim, which you have failed to provide. I will not pay phantom charges without proof of their legitimacy." "Phantom?" Blackwood's face twisted with anger. "Your husband borrowed against future harvest. When he died, the debt transferred to his estate, to you. That's law, Mrs. Hartwell." "Then produce the contracts," Pollyanna said, her voice growing stronger. "Produce signed documentation showing the terms of these loans and the interest rates charged. Because I have reviewed every paper my husband left, Mr. Blackwood, and I found nothing that justifies the sums you claim." A flicker of uncertainty crossed Blackwood's face, quickly masked, but Pollyanna saw it, and so did Ashford. "Interesting," Ashford said softly. "You claim legal debts but cannot produce documentation? That sounds remarkably like fraud, Mr. Blackwood. And you, Crow, bringing such accusations to a public gathering while drunk, using them to attack a woman's reputation. One might almost think you were being paid to create a scandal." Crow's face went purple. "How dare you suggest—" "I suggest nothing. I state facts." Ashford's voice could have cut diamond. "You have been trying to purchase Meadowbrook land for 2 years. I have refused. You have engaged in property encroachment, water diversion, and now character assassination of my employee. The pattern is quite clear. You seek to undermine me through any means available, including destroying an innocent woman's reputation." The crowd was murmuring now, the tide of opinion beginning to shift. Pollyanna could see calculation in Crow's eyes as he realized his attack was backfiring. "Mr. Ashford, a word in private?" The vicar's voice carried quiet authority. "And you as well, Mr. Crow, Mr. Blackwood. This matter should be resolved away from public spectacle." They adjourned to a small side room. Ashford, Pollyanna, Crow, Blackwood, the vicar, and 2 of the local magistrates who had been attending the assembly. For 20 tense minutes, Blackwood was pressed to produce documentation of the debts he claimed. When he finally did, pulling creased papers from his coat with obvious reluctance, Pollyanna examined them with the careful eye she had developed over months of managing accounts. "These are not signed by my husband," she said, her voice shaking with anger and relief. "The signature is forged, badly forged, and the interest rates listed here are illegal under the usury laws. Mr. Blackwood, you have attempted to defraud me of money I do not owe using falsified documents." One of the magistrates examined the papers and nodded grimly. "Mrs. Hartwell is correct. These signatures do not match the samples we have on file for Thomas Hartwell. And these interest rates, 30% compounded monthly, are well beyond legal limits. Mr. Blackwood, You will answer charges of fraud and attempted extortion." Blackwood's face had gone grey. "I was told these debts were legitimate. I purchased them from—" He stopped, seemed to realize he was about to implicate someone else. "From whom?" Ashford asked dangerously. "Who sold you these fraudulent notes, Mr. Blackwood?" But Blackwood pressed his lips together in stubborn silence, and Pollyanna suddenly knew. She looked at Crow, saw guilt flicker across his face before he could mask it. "You," she said softly, "you created these false debts, didn't you, Mr. Crow? Or had someone create them? Then you sold them to Mr. Blackwood and brought him here tonight to destroy my reputation publicly, hoping to force Mr. Ashford to distance himself from me, to make him appear weak or compromised." Crow's silence was answer enough. The magistrates looked at each other, then at Crow with expressions of disgust. "This is a serious matter," one said heavily. "Mr. Crow, Mr. Blackwood, you will both remain available for further investigation. In the meantime, Mr. Ashford, Mrs. Hartwell, you have the court's apology for this disturbance. The debts in question are void and will not be pursued." As they filed back into the main hall, Ashford caught Pollyanna's arm gently. "Are you all right?" he asked, his eyes searching her face with concern. "I will be," she said, though in truth she felt shaky and drained. "Thank you for defending me, for believing me." "I will always defend you," Ashford said, and there was something in his voice that made Pollyanna's heart leap. "Always believe you. Pollyanna, I—" But the vicar was approaching, along with several others who had witnessed the confrontation, wanting to express their support and outrage at Crow's behavior. The moment was lost, and Pollyanna was swept into a tide of conversation and reassurance that left her exhausted. It was nearly midnight when Ashford finally helped her into the carriage for the ride home. They sat in silence for several minutes, the darkness and privacy finally allowing Pollyanna to release the tight control she had maintained all evening. She felt tears prick her eyes, but refused to let them fall. "You're trembling," Ashford said quietly. Without asking permission, he shifted to sit beside her, wrapping one arm around her shoulders in a gesture that was purely comforting. "It's over now. Crow and Blackwood will face justice, and your name is cleared." "Is it?" Pollyanna asked bitterly. "You heard what he said, Damon. That's what people think when they see me with you. That I'm grasping above my station, that I'm your mistress in all but name, that they think what small minds always think when they cannot comprehend that a woman might be valued for her intelligence and capability rather than her decorative qualities," Ashford interrupted firmly. "Pollyanna, look at me." She turned to face him in the dim light of the carriage lamps, and what she saw in his eyes made her breath catch. "I hired you because you are brilliant with accounts, because you understand farming and animals, because you see problems and solutions with remarkable clarity," he said. "But I have come to value you for so much more than your professional skills. Your courage, your honesty, the way you face difficulty without flinching, the way you make me question assumptions I did not even know I held." "Damon," she whispered, not sure if it was warning or plea. "I know what I said when I hired you. I know I promised this would remain purely professional, but I find that I have been lying to both of us, Pollyanna, because what I feel when I am with you is not professional admiration. It is something far more dangerous and wonderful." "You don't believe in love," Pollyanna said, even as her heart hammered wildly in her chest. "You said marriage was a trap, that you would never—" "I said I did not believe in the kind of marriage I had witnessed, cold arrangements of convenience and duty. But you have shown me something different, a partnership built on respect and honesty, where two people work together as equals rather than one dominating the other. I want that, Pollyanna. I want it with you." "I am afraid," she admitted, the words barely audible. "My first marriage was not kind. Thomas was not cruel, but he was indifferent. I felt invisible in my own home, valued only for the work I could do. I swore I would never put myself in that position again." "You would not be invisible with me," Ashford said fiercely. "You could never be invisible. You are the first person I think of in the morning and the last at night. You are the one whose opinion I value above all others, whose smile makes my chest feel too small to contain what I feel. Pollyanna, I am in love with you, deeply, completely, terrifyingly in love with you." Pollyanna felt tears spill over at last, but they were not tears of sadness. They were tears of release, of hope, of joy she had thought lost to her forever. "I love you too," she said, her voice breaking. "I tried not to. I told myself it was impossible, that we could only ever be employer and employee. But every day I spent with you, every conversation, every moment of laughter or shared purpose, I fell more deeply until I could not imagine my life without you in it." Ashford's hand came up to cup her face with infinite gentleness, his thumb wiping away her tears. "Then marry me," he said. "Not as a business arrangement, not to satisfy society or protect reputations, but because we love each other and want to build a life together. Marry me and be my true partner in all things, in managing Meadowbrook, in facing whatever challenges come, in creating the kind of marriage that neither of us thought possible. Say yes, Pollyanna. Please say yes." For answer, Pollyanna closed the distance between them and kissed him. It was not a practiced kiss, not elegant or skilled. It was honest and sweet and full of all the longing they had both been denying for weeks. Ashford's arms came around her, pulling her close against his chest, where she could feel his heart beating as wildly as her own. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Pollyanna was smiling through her tears. "Yes," she said. "Yes, I will marry you. Not for security or convenience or to escape gossip, but because I love you and I want to spend my life with you." Ashford's answering smile was incandescent, transforming his entire face with joy. "Thank God," he said fervently. "Thank God and thank midnight for being foolish enough to panic in the road and bring you into my life." They spent the rest of the ride home planning their future, how they would announce the engagement, how Pollyanna would transition from employee to wife, how they would manage Meadowbrook together as true partners. By the time the carriage pulled up to Hartwell Cottage, Pollyanna felt as if she were floating on air. Ashford walked her to her door, reluctant to let her go even for the night. "I will call on you tomorrow," he promised. "We can tell the vicar and begin the marriage preparations. Unless," he paused, suddenly uncertain, "unless you wish for a long engagement. I understand if you need time." "I have had enough of waiting," Pollyanna interrupted, pulling him down for another kiss. "Let us be married as soon as the banns can be read. I am ready to begin our life together, Damon. More than ready." The wedding took place 6 weeks later in the chapel of St. Bridget's on a crisp November morning when the first snow of winter dusted the Yorkshire hills like blessing. Pollyanna wore a gown of pale grey silk, no longer full mourning but not yet bright colours, that Mrs. Davies had declared perfect for a widow's remarriage. Ashford stood at the altar in charcoal wool, his eyes never leaving Pollyanna's face as she walked down the aisle. The church was full. Tenant families from Meadowbrook, villagers who had come to respect Pollyanna's work, even a few of the local gentry who had decided that the unconventional match was romantic rather than scandalous. Edmund Crowe was notably absent, having left the county under a cloud of disgrace after the full extent of his schemes came to light. When the vicar pronounced them man and wife, Ashford kissed Pollyanna with such tender passion that several of the older ladies in attendance fanned themselves. And when they emerged from the church to find all of Meadowbrook's tenants lined up to cheer them, Pollyanna felt her heart swell with happiness so complete it bordered on pain. The wedding breakfast was held at Meadowbrook, in the grand dining room that Pollyanna had once thought intimidating, but now saw as simply her new home. Toasts were made, wishes offered, and through it all Ashford kept Pollyanna's hand clasped in his, as if he could not bear to let her go. That night, after the guests had departed and the house had settled into quiet, Ashford carried Pollyanna over the threshold of the master chambers that were now hers as much as his. He set her down gently, his eyes dark with love and desire. "Are you certain?" he asked, even now giving her the choice. "We can wait if you're not ready." Pollyanna answered by reaching up to unpin her hair, letting it fall in dark blonde waves around her shoulders. "I am your wife," she said softly, "and I have never been more certain of anything in my life. Love me, Damon. Show me what marriage can be when it is built on partnership and truth." And he did. 5 years later, the September afternoon was warm and golden as Pollyanna stood in the paddock watching her daughter attempt to mount the patient grey mare that had once been her own introduction to Meadowbrook. Margaret Ashford was 4 years old, fearless and determined, with her father's dark hair and her mother's capable hands. "Mama, I can do it myself," Maggie insisted, even as she struggled with the stirrup. "I know you can, darling," Pollyanna said, smiling. "But even the bravest riders accept help sometimes." "Your mother is wise," came Damon's voice from behind her, "a lesson it took me years to learn." Pollyanna turned to find her husband approaching, their 2-year-old son perched on his shoulders. Thomas, named for Pollyanna's first husband in a gesture of peace with the past, squealed with delight at being so high up, his chubby hands tangled in his father's hair. Damon set Thomas down carefully and came to stand beside Pollyanna, his arms settling around her waist with the easy affection of long familiarity. Together they watched as John Weatherby, still serving as head groom, now aided by 2 apprentices, helped Maggie into the saddle with patient expertise. "She's fearless," Damon observed with pride and a touch of anxiety, just like her mother when she rescued Midnight. "Midnight, who is now peacefully retired and spoiled rotten by our daughter," Pollyanna said, laughing. "I saw Maggie feeding him apples again this morning. As is his due after years of faithful service. Speaking of which," Damon pulled a letter from his pocket. "This arrived from Pembroke. The harvest numbers are in. Pollyanna, we're up 18% from last year." Pollyanna took the letter, scanning the figures with the practiced eye she had honed over 5 years of managing Meadowbrook alongside her husband. They had transformed the estate into one of the most productive in Yorkshire, introducing new methods of crop rotation, improving livestock breeding, and most importantly, treating tenants as partners rather than servants. The result was prosperity that benefited everyone from the main house to the smallest cottage. "That's excellent," she said, tucking the letter away. "It means we can proceed with the new school building for the tenant children. I've already spoken with the architect about designs." "Of course you have." Damon's tone was fond rather than critical. "Was there anything else you planned while I was in Leeds yesterday? Perhaps purchasing another neighboring property, organizing a lending library, reforming the entire agricultural system of Northern England?" "Only the last one," Pollyanna said primly. "And only on Tuesdays." He laughed and pulled her closer, pressing a kiss to her temple. "I love you, Mrs. Ashford. Have I mentioned that today?" "Not in the last hour. I was beginning to wonder if you'd forgotten me." "Impossible. You are the first thing I think of each morning and the last thing each night, just as I promised 5 years ago." They stood in comfortable silence, watching their children play under John's watchful eye. In the distance, Pollyanna could see the fields of Meadowbrook stretching toward the horizon, the harvest nearly complete, the land prosperous and well-tended. Tenant cottages dotted the landscape, their chimneys sending up lazy spirals of smoke into the autumn air. This was their kingdom, built not on inheritance alone but on partnership, hard work and love that had surprised them both with its depth and durability. "Do you ever think about that day?" Pollyanna asked softly. "When Midnight bolted and I grabbed his reins without thinking?" "I think about it often," Damon admitted. "I think about how close I came to never meeting you, to spending my life in the same lonely isolation I thought was inevitable. One moment of chance, a frightened horse, a brave woman, a choice to stop and truly see each other, changed everything." "Not chance," Pollyanna said firmly. "Fate. We were meant to find each other, Damon. Meant to save each other from the cages we had built around our hearts. Then I am grateful to fate and to frightened horses, and most of all to you for having the courage to grab the reins when life got wild." He turned her to face him, his eyes full of the love that had only grown stronger with time. "Thank you for saying yes, for choosing me, for building this life with me, for showing me what marriage can be when 2 people are truly partners." "Thank you for seeing me," Pollyanna said, emotion thickening her voice, "for valuing my mind as much as my heart, for making me your equal in all things, for giving me a home where I am cherished rather than tolerated." They kissed then, a gentle affirmation of vows spoken 5 years earlier, and renewed every day through actions large and small. "Mama! Papa! Watch me trot!" Maggie's excited voice broke through their moment, and they turned to see their daughter beaming with pride atop Silvermist, John leading the mare in a slow circle. "We're watching, darling," Pollyanna called back. You're doing beautifully." As the afternoon light turned golden and long shadows stretched across the paddock, the Ashford family remained together, watching horses, chasing toddlers, making plans for the estate and for the evening ahead. It was an ordinary day at Meadowbrook, filled with the quiet contentment of lives well lived and love well earned. And in the stable, an old bay stallion named Midnight dozed peacefully in his stall, dreaming perhaps of that September day when his panic had brought together two souls who needed each other more than either had known. The horse who had run wild, and the woman who had calmed him, the squire who had learned to trust, and the widow who had found courage to love again. All of them had been transformed by a single moment of connection that bloomed into something neither expected but both desperately needed. A partnership, a love story, a life built on honesty, respect, and the radical belief that marriage could be more than duty. It could be joy. And it was. The end. Thank you so much for joining me on Pollyanna and Damon's journey from that fateful day in the Yorkshire countryside to their beautiful life together at Meadowbrook Estate. Their story reminds us that sometimes the most unexpected moments, a frightened horse, an act of courage, a choice to be honest, can lead us to exactly where we're meant to be. If this story touched your heart, I'd be so grateful if you'd subscribe to the channel. Each story I share is crafted with love, and your support helps me continue bringing these emotional journeys to life. I'd absolutely love to hear from you in the comments. Tell me, what was your favorite moment in Pollyanna and Damon's story? Was it when she first calmed Midnight, their honest conversation about partnership, the confrontation with Edmund Crowe, or perhaps their tender declarations of love in the carriage? Share your thoughts with our community. I read every comment, and your reflections make this creative journey so meaningful. And if you know someone who loves historical romance, stories of second chances, or tales of finding love when you least expect it, please share this video with them. Stories are meant to be shared, and you never know whose heart might need to hear about a young widow and a country squire who found courage in each other. Until our next story together, may you find your own unexpected moments of connection. May you have the courage to grab the reins when life gets wild, and may you discover the kind of partnership that transforms everything. With warmth and gratitude, I'll see you in the next tale.